Is openly defying the United States, putting pressure on a ceasefire that is still holding at this point. The Iranian military is restricting the Strait of Hormuz. Now, you know that's a deal breaker. That's the key waterway through which millions of barrels of oil must flow immediately. Apparently, Iran's military can shut it down at will. Also this hour, Vice President J.D. Vance is headed to Pakistan for talks to forge lasting peace in the Middle East. And while the war between the U.S. and Israel against Iran began over nuclear weapons and keeping that radical Islamic regime from getting and using them, it is evident the hinge point between peace and more war could be the Strait of Hormuz. I'm Harris Faulkner. You are in the Faulkner Focus. The president is putting Iran on notice again, posting Iran is doing a very poor job, dishonorable, some would say, of allowing oil to go through the strait. That is not the agreement we have! Exclamation point. He also writes there are reports that Iran is charging fees to tankers going through the strait. They better not be. And if they are, they better stop now. We do note the president told NBC News he is optimistic about a deal with Iran, although he also warns that Iran had better negotiate seriously because our military is at the ready. A lot riding on those high-stakes meetings that Vice President Vance is about to lead. General Jack Keane earlier.
President Trump is not going to make a bad deal here. He knows these guys are liars and cheaters. Listen, nobody has negotiated more with this regime than this president. And this is the only president who's ever taken them on consequentially in terms of military operations, for a fact. So he knows what he's dealing with here. And I've got confidence he is not going to make a bad deal here after all the sacrifices that we've made going forward here.
Well, this moment is red hot with import. A New York Times headline, these talks will be the biggest test yet of the vice president's negotiating skills. Here's former Vice President Mike Pence.
The last thing we want is another Iran nuclear deal. The president and I got out of that deal back during our administration. We put a maximum pressure campaign on. Biden immediately returned to office and went back to the politics of appeasement.
He flew F-16 fighter jets with 3 combat tours in Iraq. Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney is standing by. We will begin with senior White House correspondent Jackie Heinrich. Jackie.
Harris, the president does seem optimistic that something could happen in Islamabad. He told NBC Iran's leaders talk differently, much differently when you're at a meeting than they do in the press. They're much more reasonable, Trump said during a phone interview. They're agreeing to all the things that they have to agree to. Remember, they've been conquered. They have no military. He also said if Iran does not make a deal, it's going to be very painful. And that is what the vice president echoed on his way to Islamabad this morning.
We're looking forward to the negotiation. I think it's going to be positive. We'll, of course, see. As the President of the United States said, if the Iranians are willing to negotiate in good faith, we're certainly willing to extend the open hand. If they're going to try to play us, then they're going to find that the negotiating team is not that receptive.
Analysts are warning not to let this negotiation drag on for too long, saying the Iranian playbook is to delay and obfuscate, and they're better at this stuff than actually fighting.
The longer there is lower oil prices, the lower there's less economic pain, the longer there's less political pressure, it makes it that much tougher in their minds for the administration to go back and finish the job militarily. That, I believe, is really their strategy.
So the president doesn't have any public events on his schedule for most of the day. We will see him when he leaves the White House to head to Virginia for a MAGA Inc. roundtable later on this afternoon. Harris.
Jackie, thank you very much. In focus now, Lieutenant Colonel Dan Rooney, a Republican candidate for Congress in Oklahoma, and I said one heck of a flyer with 3 combat tours in Iraq. Welcome to the program. I want to get your first thoughts on where we are with the Strait of Hormuz and the idea that mines can be laid back down. I mean, the IRGC is controlling that waterway now.
Yeah, I was actually just on with your dear friend Brian Kilmeade, and we talked about this. There is not an appetite for a long war, but we have to stay the course, right? The Strait of Hormuz is critical. We know 20% of the world's oil supply goes through this strait, and it's going to be difficult. People don't have patience, but staying the course, it is geographically a very difficult thing to secure. We can't send ships into it, but this very hopeful, obviously, this ceasefire paves the way for some negotiations, and praying for President or Vice President Vance in his efforts in Pakistan.
All right, so you say this is critical. They control it right now. Does this tip us back into kinetic activity? Does this tip us back into like a mini war to get this issue settled? Because this can't go on. The president, you see how angry he is.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt they're violating the ceasefire, and those are decisions that the president and Sec War Pete Hegseth are going to make. We really need, in this case too, is Israel to stay on the sidelines, stay out of Lebanon. They've used that as an excuse to kind of half-heartedly go into this ceasefire, but being aligned with our allies over there, with Israel, critical to let the dust settle and hopefully some diplomacy to take effect. But there's no doubt. I think the patience is low with our president. This is a good faith measure, and I don't think anything is off the table. If that strait is not opened and Iran is not doing their part of the deal, we could see kinetic activities resume. And I will tell you, the boys and girls are reloaded and ready, and this was a great pause, the cadence for us to take a break out of the air, but everybody is standing ready to get back to work if we're called upon to do so by Sec War.
All right, I want to talk with you about the vice president headed now to Islamabad in Pakistan, and he will lead the talks there. Our Fox News contributor Hugh Hewitt on Special Report laid out what he believes needs to happen for the president to claim the ceasefire move as a victory at this point. Let's watch.
I think this is a big win for President Trump. I think Iran blinked. His Truth Post, the most recent one, says, subject to the opening of the Strait of Hormuz. If they don't open the strait, we'll be doing this again tomorrow. But if they do open the strait, big win for the president.
So I went to that right away because, Lieutenant Colonel, there's no doubt that comes up at these talks. But these are really high stakes now for the vice president. Your top line thoughts on that?
Yeah, but top line, this is a test for our vice president. There's no doubt. This is a tremendous, we call it ADVON mission in the military, for him to go and get these negotiations open for a sustained solution. I really am grateful, though, that we've gotten to this point, because we can't leave without Iran's ability, forever denied, to play this card again by controlling 20% of the world's oil supply. So whether it is through diplomacy or whether we get back to work as fighter pilots in the air, I think we're going to see a lot happen in the next couple days here.
All right. Yeah, the weekend matters as we go into it on this Friday. I do want to get to this. A brave anonymous Iranian woman describing what life is like on the ground in Iran during the U.S. and Israeli operations. Here it is. She says, quote, in effect, ordinary people have been turned into human shields within a vast militarized landscape. A pervasive sense of anger, paranoia, and exhaustion has taken hold. She also said that when U.S. strikes killed the supreme leader, that his young daughter told, her younger daughter said, quote, Iranian children were screaming and cheering, and even her teachers were quietly snapping their fingers and dancing. She says, perhaps for the first time, we allowed ourselves to believe our long-held dream was beginning to take shape. What's your reaction?
You know, we obviously talk a lot about the strait and the world's oil supply. I think lost in this is the human piece of this. What do we all want? We want an opportunity to be free. We want our families to be safe. And there are so many noble things here that they get tucked in behind the politics, the big objectives. And my hope and prayer is that Iran is going to come to the table, and we're going to see lasting change in in that region, for the families, for our entire world with the oil supplies, and we'll see how this unfolds. But there's a lot at stake, and this is generational change that President Trump is after here. If not him, then who? We are there, and we've got to stay the course and finish this for those citizens and for the global oil supply.
Yeah, and if not now, when also to further that, because we are getting reports of just how fragile the Iranian economy is right now. So, I mean, they are at the point now at their lowest, and still they fight with the Strait of Hormuz. But VP Vance is on the way for those talks. Great to see you on this Friday. Lieutenant Colonel Rooney, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. And I'll just pause. Everybody keep those men and women fighting in your prayers, and we'll pray for the great solution in that region that will change generations around the world.
Amen. Thank you.
Nếu quý vị thấy nội dung này hữu ích, xin hãy ủng hộ kênh bằng cách nhấn đăng ký, bấm thích và để lại bình luận bên dưới. Sự đồng hành của quý vị là nguồn động lực quý báu để chúng tôi tiếp tục mang đến những nội dung tốt hơn trong các chương trình tiếp theo.